The idea for a hot spring getaway came from my husband, James. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat for just the two of us. But, without consulting me, he invited our son, Mike, and his wife, Jennifer, with whom I had a strained relationship. When we arrived at the hotel, Jennifer's rude comment hit me like a slap in the face. If you don't want to be with Mike and me so much, why don't you just sleep in the parking lot or somewhere out there? Her words, dripping with mockery, stung even more because neither my husband nor my son stepped in to defend me. I could feel my patience unraveling. Fine, if you want it that way, I'll sleep outside. Goodbye, I snapped, storming off to the rental car parked in the lot. I needed space to clear my head, so I drove off, wandering aimlessly through the streets until morning. As the hours passed, I heard sirens blaring in the distance, and when I finally checked my phone, there were countless missed calls from James and Mike. What the hell is going on? How many times do we have to call and text you? James's frantic voice demanded as I answered. They explained that a smoking incident had caused a fire scare at the hotel. I was appalled, not by the scare itself, but by their complete lack of concern for me. No apology, just panic. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Tell me, James, who do you care more about, Mike and Jennifer, or me? What kind of question is that? This isn't the time for that. Just come back, he responded, sounding confused and irritated. I let out a sigh. I see. Mike is your son with her, and I guess I no longer matter. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. They were clearly stunned, and that's when I decided to reveal something that had been buried in our marriage for years. My name is Elizabeth, 46 years old, and this year marks 20 years of marriage to James. We both work at a hobby manufacturer, James in sales and I in accounting, just like we have since we first met. We were blessed with a son, Mike, who grew up to marry Jennifer, a girl he met at university. To outsiders, we might seem like a normal, happy family, but in truth, we've been carrying a burden that we can no longer ignore. One evening, after a long day of work, I walked into the kitchen to find James hunched over the computer. I glanced over his shoulder and saw images of stunning resorts and hot springs. Curiosity piqued. I moved closer. James turned to me with a smile. I've been thinking of planning a trip, he said. A trip? That sounds amazing. I almost squealed, unable to contain my excitement. We've both been so busy with work lately. Don't you think it's time we finally took a break? James nodded. I've been feeling the same way. Thankfully, outside of our busiest seasons, we both had flexible schedules, which made the idea even more exciting. I hadn't felt that giddy in years, though James initially helped with household chores after we married. That eventually stopped. He claimed work was the reason, leaving me to handle most of the household responsibilities. This trip, which James himself suggested, felt like a much-needed escape from the stress and fatigue that had built up over time. More than anything, I was just relieved that my husband, who typically seemed only interested in his work and rarely engaged in conversation with me, had suggested we take a break together. The trip sounds great, I said, smiling, but there's something I've been holding back from telling you. What's that? What's on your mind? He asked, looking at me curiously. It's about Mike and Jennifer, I replied, my tone darkening. The mention of our son and daughter-in-law made my heart sink. Since Mike had entered junior high, he'd become distant and cold toward me. No matter how hard I tried, he wouldn't engage in conversation. He locked himself in his room, went out with his friends, and when he did speak, it was usually dismissive, like leave me alone or it's nothing. Sometimes, he was outright rude, demanding things like, hurry up with the food, or give me some pocket money. On a few occasions, I was even locked out of the house, sometimes with a chain on the gate. At first, I chalked it up to teenage rebellion, But as time went on, his behavior only worsened, and I grew more concerned. I tried to talk to James about it several times, but he dismissed my concerns, saying, "It's just a phase, or maybe adolescence. You should understand that and handle it as a mother." I continued to try and reach out to Mike, but his attitude didn't change. When he went off to high school and moved into a dorm, he hardly ever came home. Even after he married Jennifer, I wasn't invited to their wedding, and my congratulatory letters were never answered. The first time Mike brought Jennifer home, I immediately felt something was off. Her brightly dyed hair, heavy makeup, and flashy clothes gave her a bold, attention-grabbing appearance, one that seemed out of place even for her age. In front of James and Mike, she behaved politely, but when we were alone, her demeanor changed. She gave me a cold, lingering stare, then said with a sneer, "I wondered what kind of woman Mike's mother would be, and now I see she's so plain. No wonder he can't stand you." Her words stung deeply, and I couldn't help but think that Jennifer was a perfect match for Mike. They didn't have children, and from what I could tell, they lived a carefree life, despite their obvious disdain for me, especially Mike's lingering animosity since they were first introduced. They began visiting often, more than just the occasional stop by. Mike and Jennifer would lounge around, insulting me, and sometimes even stay for dinner, all while making me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own home. I was left to prepare and clean up the meals alone, while Mike and Jennifer arrogantly demanded more drinks and snacks, leaving me no peace. I rarely joined their conversations, but one day, Jennifer condescendingly remarked, "Elizabeth, why do you even work after marriage? Spending hours with old men making toys?" I couldn't do that. Jennifer, supported by Mike, didn't work herself and had a habit of skipping jobs. Given her work history, it was clear she wouldn't last long in any job. Hearing her gloat about her inability to keep a job only added to my frustration. I sighed inwardly, unable to tolerate their selfish and tyrannical behavior any longer. I sought advice from James again, but as usual, his response was dismissive. "Mike is still as rebellious as ever, but Jennifer isn't that bad, right?" he said. I replied, feeling defeated, "But I'm being treated like a maid by Jennifer. I have my own job, too, and my body can't handle the stress anymore." James shrugged it off, claiming he didn't know what to do. Eventually, the visits from Mike and Jennifer stopped. Whether they no longer wanted to see me or had other commitments, work or financial obligations, their absence was a relief. However, James still met with them occasionally. Sometimes, I'd catch the scent of their perfume and cigarette smoke on him when he came home. As an asthmatic, I'd asked Mike and Jennifer to refrain from smoking inside the house during their visits, but their disregard for my health made their presence even harder to tolerate. Despite the tension between us, I found some peace in their absence. Determined not to let Mike and Jennifer ruin our hot spring trip, I worked hard to convince James that it should be just the two of us. He finally agreed, and I looked forward to the getaway. I pored over the guidebook, bought new clothes, and eagerly anticipated the vacation. But, of course, it didn't go as planned. On the very first day, as we arrived at the airport for our flight to Hawaii, pulling our suitcases and preparing to pass through security, I heard familiar voices. I turned around to find Mike and Jennifer standing there. "What? Why are you here?" I asked, shocked. "Did Dad tell you we decided to come to Hawaii?" Mike replied, his tone casual. I glared at James in disbelief. "Mike and Jennifer have always dreamed of going to Hawaii," he said. "I'll take care of everything, so please, let's go together." I was stunned. Despite all my efforts to ensure this trip would be a break from the chaos, James still prioritized Mike and Jennifer. My plans felt ruined, and I considered turning back. But just as I was about to do so, Mike and Jennifer stopped me. For the past 11 years, I've wanted to reconcile with you, Mom, but I couldn't bring myself to be honest about it. Mike said, I know I've been unfair and awkward, and I realize now that I've treated you badly. I want to get along with you, Elizabeth. I don't want to strain our relationship anymore. His words caught me off guard. It was the first time I'd heard Mike speak with such humility, and Jennifer seemed eager to avoid being seen as the villain. Reluctantly, I agreed to go to Hawaii with them. On the plane, Mike and Jennifer were in high spirits, ordering drinks and laughing, while James sat happily next to me. Despite their upbeat mood, I felt an uneasy tension and tried to distract myself by gazing out the window. Upon arriving in Hawaii and renting a car, we followed the revised plan that James had suggested on the plane. However, it didn't take long for Mike and Jennifer to begin ignoring me. They spoke only to James at water-based attractions like Sea Life Park and Waikiki Beach, intentionally tripping me and making me fall into the water. At lunch, they pushed their leftovers onto me, and I couldn't help but feel increasingly harassed. The tension grew even more after dinner when Mike and Jennifer came to our hotel room wanting to drink. When James went downstairs to get some snacks, they decided to make themselves at home. Without asking, they sat on my bed. Mike pulled out an ashtray and a cigarette. Hey, this is a non-smoking room. Stop it, please, I said, my voice shaky. It's fine if we ventilate, Mike replied, annoyed. Jennifer began to light a cigarette too. Reaching my breaking point, I shouted, enough! Stop smoking in a non-smoking room. You'll get us thrown out if you don't follow the hotel's rules. Mike shot me an irritated look. What's with you all of a sudden? I told you before that I have asthma and can't handle cigarette smoke. Please, just follow the hotel's rules, I said, struggling to hold my composure. Jennifer's response cut through me. Your serious, motherly attitude has always been so irritating, she snapped. Smoking in a non-smoking room is the height of rudeness. God, you're so annoying. What's wrong with having fun on a trip? If you hate smoke so much, why don't you just sleep in the parking lot or somewhere else? I felt my blood run cold, overwhelmed by their words. Just then, James returned, looking confused. Hey, it's loud even in the hallway. What's with all the shouting? I can't stand being with these two for another second, I said, my emotions spilling out. They're trying to smoke in a non-smoking room. And why did you bring them along despite me saying no? This is unbelievable. Tears welled up in my eyes as my frustrations came pouring out. Mike and Jennifer looked down at me, smirking. You're just annoying, acting all high and mighty, Mike said with a smirk. You're no fun. Not even drinking a single sip of alcohol. I felt something snap inside me. Fine, I get it. I'd rather sleep outside than stay here. Bye. Hey, Elizabeth, James began, but I quickly gathered my valuables and phone. Storming out of the room, James tried to stop me by grabbing my arm, but I shook him off. Leave me alone. I want to be alone, I said, my voice shaking. I hurried out of the hotel and made my way to the parking lot. I didn't see James follow me. Getting into the rental car, I drove around Hawaii at night, desperately trying to clear my mind. Despite my suspicions, Mike and Jennifer hadn't changed. James, too, had ignored my wishes and brought them along. It seemed impossible to continue any semblance of a family relationship after this trip, especially with the secret about James and Mike that I had kept hidden for so long. The more I thought about it, the more anger and sadness overtook me. So, I kept driving, hoping the motion would calm my emotions. As I drove through Hawaii's beautiful night scenery, my mind slowly cooled. Eventually, exhaustion set in, and I parked the rental car in a coastal park, deciding to rest inside. I thought I heard sirens in the distance, but I was too tired to care and quickly fell asleep. When I woke up, the soft light of dawn greeted me, and the sparkling sea stretched out before me. The beauty of the morning was soothing my spirits, and after having breakfast at a seaside diner, I remembered to check my phone. I had turned it off the night before while driving because I didn't want to hear from James or see his texts. Now, feeling calmer, I turned it on and was shocked to find an overwhelming number of missed calls and texts. Starting from around 11 p.m. the previous night, there were at least 30 or 40 of them. Just as I was scrolling through the messages, my phone rang. It was James. "What the hell are you doing? Do you know how many times we've tried to reach you? I've called and texted you." His voice was a mix of anger and distress. I replied, still confused. "What do you mean? I just had breakfast at a seaside diner. We're in deep trouble, and you're casually having breakfast?" Mike's voice came through the line, irritated. "What trouble are you talking about?" I asked, a growing sense of dread building within me. "It's exactly as it sounds," James said. "After you left, we had a little party with cigarettes, alcohol, and snacks. Before we knew it, we fell asleep, and when we woke up, the room was filled with smoke." "A fire?" I asked, horrified. "Yes," James confirmed. "The cause was Mike and Jennifer's cigarettes not being fully extinguished. Thankfully, it was just a small fire, but the fire trucks arrived in droves, and everyone in the hotel had to evacuate. Now we're being blamed for it. Jennifer suffered a minor burn and was taken to the hospital. Mike and I have to go to the police for questioning and apologize to the hotel staff." I sat in stunned silence for a moment. "I see. Now the sirens I heard last night must have been for that." James, in his usual carefree and irresponsible manner, added, "So, we're tied up here and can't leave. Can you go to the hospital and stay with Jennifer?" His lack of genuine concern for me, and his prioritization of Jennifer over everything, was painfully clear. It was like nothing had changed. My feelings of anger and disappointment began to bubble up once more, and I realized I had to confront James once and for all. "James, who is more important to you, me or Mike and Jennifer?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "What? Why are you asking that now? This isn't the time," James replied, sounding bewildered and a bit frustrated. "Well," I said, feeling a surge of clarity and strength, "Mike is your child with that woman, and it seems I'm no longer in your thoughts." "Hey, what do you mean? Don't joke around at a time like this," James said, his frustration becoming more apparent. I took a deep breath, ready to finally tell him the truth. The secret I had kept hidden for so long had to come out. "Mike," I said firmly, "you are the child of your father and his mistress." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Mike didn't speak, and I could almost hear his confusion through the phone. James, too, grew visibly agitated. "What? What are you talking about?" James stammered, trying to understand what I was saying. I didn't let his confusion stop me. This had been building for years, and it was time for the truth to come out. "You heard me," I said, my voice firm. "Mike is your son, but he's not my responsibility. He's the product of your affair, and I am done pretending otherwise." There was a long silence before James finally spoke again, his voice unsteady. "Elizabeth, I don't know what you're trying to do, but this isn't the time for that. We need to focus on what's happening now, not on whatever you're bringing up." I knew then that nothing would change, that no amount of truth would ever be enough to make James see me for who I was. But I had finally said what needed to be said. 24 years ago, James had an affair with a woman who worked with us. By the time I discovered it, she was already pregnant. "The nerve of her," she said to me. "I'll give you the child, so don't ask for anything in return." I found her attitude utterly contemptible, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon the child. Despite everything, I decided to raise the child as my own. Without seeking any compensation, the affair became public when the mistress was fired, but taking you in helped soften the blow. Even though we weren't biologically related, I raised you like my own son. Your rebellious phase started in middle school, and at first, I thought it was just typical teenage behavior. But as the years passed, your attitude grew more challenging, and I began to realize that you were James's son, not mine by blood. It was a hard truth to accept. Despite the bond one had formed with you, I couldn't ignore the painful reality of your origins. Mike, still in shock, shouted through the phone, "That can't be true. I can't just be some bastard child. I have proof of your father's affair," I said, my voice steady. I kept it with me because I trusted James to keep it safe. "So you're saying you're not my real mother?" Mike asked, his voice trembling. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied, my heart heavy. "I tried to be a real mother, but it's clear we don't get along. Maybe it's because you carry her blood." Mike went silent, the weight of my words sinking in. James's voice came through the phone, rising with frustration. "What are you saying? You promised you wouldn't tell Mike." "I don't care about promises," I snapped. "Be grateful for the 24 years I've put up with this."